This lucky guy here is Philip Miller. 1 year ago, he survived an extinction-level event. Hoping that he wasn't the only one, Phil decides to look for other people. He drives all over the country, announcing his existence with a loudspeaker, but there's not a soul left standing. Of course, there could be other survivors doing the same thing, maybe missing Phil by days or less. But that could go on forever. So he decides to leave a message painted over several billboards, letting people know where to find him. Then he goes back to Tucson, Arizona. Moving into his favorite mansion, he fills it with cool stuff from all 50 states and tries to find happiness in that meaningless wealth. He even mocks Tom Hanks for talking to a ball. But Wilson is a modest attempt compared to his own work 5 months later, when he populates his favorite bar. Each ball has a name and a different personality. The man is clearly losing his mind, and the few flashes of sanity are painful. Like when he's hitting on a mannequin and her arm comes off. Tired of this madness, Phil decides to join his fellow humans in the afterlife. The sight of smoke not too far away makes him abort that plan. He drives there immediately and gets to a camping site. That means his prayers were answered at last. Succumbing to the emotion, Phil passes out. But then he wakes up and actually meets her. It's a very different woman from the one he carefully described in those prayers, so his level of gratitude begins to drop. Her name is Carol, and she's also been all alone since the apocalypse. She drove to Tucson because of his message on the billboard. Meeting a person after so long is very weird, and they both struggle to interact. They seem to have completely opposite personalities. Driving to the store, Carol wants him to respect traffic signs and park correctly. Phil patiently points out the absurdity of her demands, but she is very stubborn and annoying. She insists on these pointless rules and claims they're the only thing that can keep us sane. To show her that his sanity is long gone, Phil gives up on parking and drives right into the storefront. These two are off to a terrible start, and he makes it even worse by inviting her over. Carol is disgusted by the state of that mansion, and no one could blame her in this case. She also disapproves of the stolen paintings, harshly judging him for taking stuff from other people, dead or not, which doesn't stop her from moving to the mansion next door, of course. Now she is determined to make a decent man out of Phil, to his complete despair. But mismatched as they are, there is no other match available. The delicate topic of species conservation is brought up. Carol agrees on its importance, but there's just one little thing. She wants to get married first. Yes, you heard that right. She won't be repopulating planets without a nice ring around her finger. As arguing with Carol has no point either, Phil just makes sure that living together is not part of the deal before proposing. The big day comes, and while Carol is disappointed at his lack of enthusiasm, her insane effort to make it special ends up touching that pig heart of his. Once the knot is officially tied, there is an awkward first attempt at reproduction. That makes him even more disheartened about the future. But hey, it's not like he has a better choice. Or so he thinks. Just a few days after the wedding, a gorgeous woman named Melissa arrives in Tucson, having seen those same billboards. Phil simply cannot believe his stupidity, especially when she tells him that the sign has no address and she's been dragging for weeks. Melissa had actually arrived before he got married, but didn't know where he lived. Carol begins to metaphorically pee around her husband right away. She makes sure to ruin his attempts to impress the new girl, which is not really so difficult. Just by describing the way he was living until they met, she makes Melissa totally disgusted without a single lie. In fact, Phil is still using the swimming pool as a toilet to this day, and that doesn't help his case at all. After these introductions, Melissa moves to the house across the street. Shaving his beard for the first time since the world ended, Phil shows up like a new man, only to be ignored. Both women can see through this surge of self-care. Later, Melissa makes it clear that she would never date a married man, special circumstances or not. Fed up with a situation he never wanted, Phil decides to get a divorce. But once again, Carol has perfect timing and shows her sweeter side right when he was about to tell her. Too much of a coward to tell them the truth, he comes up with another stupid plan. As it concerns both of the only two humans available, he is forced to consult his Wilsons again. They tell him it's a great idea and that he should go ahead. What could go wrong after that, right? So here is Phil, crying the fakest tears and telling Carol he is worried sick. His poor wife falls for the act and wants to know what's bothering him. He goes on to tell her that he's been thinking about their future kids. They'll have to sleep with each other to keep repopulating the earth, and that makes him so sad. Carol is also devastated by the thought, until he mentions that a possible solution would be an extra set of babies who have at least a different mother. Realizing that his intentions are the worst, Carol snaps at him and kicks him out. Informed by her, Melissa shows up at his house later to yell at him too. Now both women are angry and ignore his efforts to redeem himself. But after they cool down, he gets invited for a surprising conversation. They don't think the idea itself is a bad one. They just want to set clear rules to make sure it's all very scientific. Over the moon with such news, Phil pretends that he'll only sleep with Melissa for the greater good. On the arranged date, he plans a romantic evening for her. The more he tries to make it all special, the more annoyed she gets by his evident disrespect for their mutual agreement. His ridiculous mating ritual is so over the top that even fireworks are involved. And that was his biggest mistake, actually. Someone else was driving around without an address. A man named Todd. He tells them he was about to give up and leave the city when the show began. Melissa is delighted to meet a man who is not Phil and immediately cancels the conception plans she had for tonight. Carol is also relieved that her husband won't be forced to cheat on her anymore. Todd turns out to be a very nice guy, and he has a lot in common with Melissa. Phil can barely control his anger and frustration. He tries to keep this guy away from his concubine, but everything he does backfires. The four of them go on a double date, and Phil takes off his shirt. He is sure that Todd will be embarrassed to do the same, but it's not the case at all. Melissa asks him about a large scar on the side of his stomach. A sad story about a transplant makes Todd choke up and leave, followed by Melissa. This is how they start dating. Carol congratulates Phil, thinking that he already knew about the scar and planned this on purpose to bring them together. Phil's life keeps getting worse and worse. Now the neighbors are always up all night, and he can't sleep with all that romantic music and the laughter. That doesn't seem to bother Carol at all. Unlike that toilet pool of his. She begs him to clean that abomination, but he won't lift a finger to help his so-called wife. He blames her for rushing him into marriage days before his true love's arrival. But Carol also ends up giving him an idea. She is so attached to order that back when it was just the two of them. A presidential election took place. As the only candidate, Phil obviously won but then forgot about it completely. Now his wife reminds him he can shut them up anytime. He's the President of the United States. Not wanting to sound too bossy, Phil organizes a meeting to present the grievance board as an official channel for complaints. He's only doing this so he can say how much he hates to hear the other couple having fun together. But everyone ignores that, including Carol, and they decide to force him to clean the pool instead. The next day, he puts on the hazmat suit to face the unthinkable, but the task proves to be too much for him. Depressed about the way things turned out for him, he begins to obsess about the fact that he could be with Melissa if Todd didn't exist. Finally, he goes to Todd's house one day and suggests a brief road trip just for fun. After driving for 3 hours, he pretends to hear a back tire pop and asks Todd to get out of the car to check. Phil begins to drive off, leaving the poor man alone in the desert, but he can't bring himself to do that. Todd gets back in the car laughing at the fun joke, still convinced that they are good friends. Driving back home, he thanks Phil for all his blessings. Better than having a girl like Melissa, it's great to count on good people like him and Carol. Phil is mortified to hear that. Using that guilt as motivation, he finally cleans that putrid pool. Carol can hardly believe he really did, and she says she's proud to be his wife. Phil is also happy to see he is able to do something nice for her. However, the guilt wears off too quickly. Around the bonfire at night, Melissa shows a bracelet made by Todd, and both women give more attention to that than to the clean pool, despite his hard work for a whole afternoon. The next day, he goes to that bar, trying to think of something that could make him the center of attention for a change. Not even the Wilsons can help him this time. But as he leaves the bar, there is a living cow right there, as if just waiting for him to take advantage of her bucolic self. So he invites everyone over for a surprise. They are clearly expecting another of Phil's stupid tricks. That makes him enjoy their reaction even more when they see the cow. This is the first living animal they get to see in over 2 years. The disagreements begin when he says they should eat their new friend. As usual, Phil is unable to discuss things as an adult and resorts to cheap lies. He tells them he is lactose intolerant, but still gets outvoted. To make things worse, the cow moves in with Todd because his yard is the only one where there's grass. Phil loses the spotlight and is forced to watch them drink fresh milk. So he has yet another immature solution and steals the cow in the middle of the night, taking it to the bar. The plan is to let the girls cry over the missing milk until he finds the cow and becomes their hero. The idea is so bad that it's surprising that the Wilsons didn't stop him. When they realize the cow is gone, Melissa suspects him right away. They decide to go on a search, and her first stop is Phil's favorite bar. Luckily for him, the cow is gone when she gets there. His relief turns into anger when he's looking for the cow and sees Todd has found it. But he's actually such a nice guy that he lets Phil take the credit, feeling bad that everyone wrongly accused him. Just when it looks like the cow saga is over, the animal is in Carol's bedroom when she wakes up the neighborhood screaming. Todd says they can't make it come down the stairs, so that means Carol needs to leave. That's the perfect excuse for her to move in with her beloved husband. She drives him crazy with her noisy breathing machine at night. And during the day, she begins to ruin all the famous paintings by drawing puppies and ducks on them. Driving to the city outskirts, Phil sets fire to the groceries he was supposed to take home because that's how mature he is. Turning to God once again, he begs for a second chance to make things right. By now, he should have noticed that his God is a prankster, but he still rejoices to see 2 beautiful women coming out of a car. Gail and Erica are in a lesbian relationship, but only because they were out of options. Phil is the first man they meet in years, and they are both very excited. Not wanting to ruin such a lucky break, he has the nerve to tell them that he doesn't know about any other survivors. After a pleasant visit to their mansion, he comes back home to feed Carol some lame excuses and gets ready for the best night of his life. As Gail used to be a chef, dinner is amazing. Everything is going great until they notice the wedding ring. Believe or not, Phil is prepared for this. He tells them the sad story of Carol's death, sobbing profusely. Trying to cheer him up, the girls suggest skinny dipping in a hot spring. In his neighborhood, Carol is telling her friends how nicely Phil is treating her now. They decide to do something special to surprise him when he comes back from the camping trip. You already know what's about to happen, right? Their car almost collides with the other one. Everyone's excitement to meet more humans is quickly replaced by outrage when Phil's lies become apparent. He even tries to say he was once married to another Carol who really died, but no one buys that story. Not even Todd takes his side now, embarrassed to have defended him before. Banished from the community, Phil hides in the bar and tries to pretend that the Wilsons are more than enough for him. Shocked to see no one comes to check on him for days, he stalks the group around. He hears them saying horrible things about him, but they all turn out to be true. In a rare moment of sense, Phil comes to the bonfire to apologize to them. They can see he is truly sorry, and his words are sincere, but it takes some time until they're ready to forgive him. Carol brings him divorce papers, but they part ways on friendly terms. That also means he has the house back. He begins to regain everyone's trust, slowly but surely. Gail and Erica start to flirt with him again, now that he is no longer married. Scared of losing what cost him so much to recover, he decides to get rid of that billboard message to avoid attracting any more men into town. But of course, something goes wrong, and he finds himself stranded under the scorching sun. His friends have no idea where he went, and by night, they begin to worry. That's when his savior arrives in a truck. The new guy is everything Phil has always feared. Handsome, fit, smart, and possessing all kinds of useful skills. To our hero's disbelief, his name is also Philip Miller. Phil's middle name is Tandy, while the newcomer doesn't have one. So everybody calls him Tandy now, despite his protests. The girls are all over new Philip now, but he only has eyes for Carol. That makes old Phil realize how much he wants to be with her. Not over a silly competition, but because she has actually grown on him. Meanwhile, new Philip is revolutionizing post-apocalyptic life for all of them. The man has knowledge about solar energy and growing crops. For the first time, Todd feels as rejected as Phil, and they begin to plot against this perfect dude. However, Todd's anger dwindles in the light of day, and he wants to back down. Phil tries to convince him that it would be easy to drive him far into the desert and then just leave him there. Todd realizes that this is exactly what Phil was doing to him before. That was never a prank. Tired of being let down so many times, Todd waits until everyone is gathered by the fire and tells them everything. He says Tandy is planning to get rid of Philip the same way he once tried to get rid of him. Everyone is shocked to hear that. A vote is called for and carried out in a few minutes. New Philip is also the new president now. He decides Tandy has to leave Tucson and never come back. Stubborn as a mule, old Phil locks himself in a room until people begin to worry. But when he finally comes out, the president is not too happy about that. The next day, he decides to do what Phil was planning for him and leaves him to perish under the sun. When one of the Wilsons comes rolling his way, he thinks it can only be his mind beginning to melt. But it's actually Carol who decided to leave the city with him. Her morals are too strict to be with someone who would abandon a person like this. She knows that he did the same thing to Todd, but at least he chickened out at the last minute. A girl's gotta work with what she has. And this is the end. This was a recap of the 2015 series, The Last Man on Earth by 20th Century Fox, starring Will Forte and Kristen Shaw. If you were the last person on the planet, which character would you choose to keep you company? Let us know in the comments below with #CinemaRecap. Until next time.